Hello, and welcome to the Storytellers Club podcast. I'm your host, Chris Hicks. My guest today is Ian Rogers. Ian is the author of the award-winning short story collection, Every House is Haunted. His work has appeared on Tor.com, which is now Reactor.com. Just learned that recently. Cemetery Dance and numerous anthologies, and his debut novel, Family, is set to release this October 2024. And as we will find out today, he was a teenage UFO researcher. We will be discussing two of his stories. First, The House on Ashley Avenue, which appears in the Every House is Haunted collection and is currently in development with Sam Raimi. The second story, You Have What I Need, appears in Screams from the Dark anthology. So if you want to avoid spoilers, press pause here and go read those stories before we continue. Welcome back. Sit tight, have a listen. Welcome, officially.
Thanks for having me.
What got you into writing?
Well, I think like a lot of people, it was probably their parents. My parents were both big readers. My mom was definitely the horror influence. My father never really had much use for horror fiction. Sort of thought it was, it just didn't like horror. Just didn't like being scared. Doesn't really like horror movies or horror books. But it's always very encouraging in all of my creative pursuits. I draw as well. I used to be a cartoonist. I had a comic strip in our local newspaper when I was like 12 years old. So,
oh wow!
Again, it was all just really encouraged by my family. But the writing side, I always knew or thought that I would be a writer in some capacity. I thought I was actually going to go into film. Film is incredibly hard to break into, and you could spend your whole life trying to get even just one movie made. And for me, I had all these stories that I wanted to tell. Even an independent movie can still be quite costly, but it doesn't cost anything to write a novel. So
right.
It was sort of a no-brainer for me to sort of go in that direction when film and film school didn't really work out. And I think because I come from a family of readers and I had that encouragement from my family, it was definitely it's the reason why I like all types of writing. It's the same way when I read or when I watch movies. I like everything. I cross all genres. But my mom was definitely the big horror influence. She always had Stephen King books and John Saul, Dean Koontz, all the guys of the 80s and the 90s lying around the house. And for my dad, It was always Louis L'Amour westerns and National Geographic magazine. So that was really the big influence for me growing up. That end, I would say, I came in sort of like the dawn of, supernatural paranormal TV. Whether it was the X-Files, early 90s, Independence Day, Men in Black. That sort of thing really really influenced me, and I was like, wow, I want to be in a world where I can write these types of stories and write these sort of connected stories. When you see a lot of these weren't even just one-off. They were these rich worlds where people were sort of, exploring the supernatural or sometimes fighting it. It was something that really, really intrigued me from a young age.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, I being a man of a certain age, of a similar age. So yeah, I definitely had kind of the same thing with from my parents. My mother, Stephen King, Dean Koontz, John Saul. That's like I think every horror writer gets into it because they read a Stephen King book at a too young of an age. So that's kind of how it ends up going. Now, something else I wanted to ask you about. You were a teenage UFO researcher. I see you were in a documentary about that or something along those lines.
Yeah, between writing my comic strip and writing my fledgling short stories, I was also big into UFOs and the paranormal, which again is probably why I was so interested in the X-Files at the time. My father was in the RCMP, so the X-Files is like these FBI agents who investigate the supernatural. It was just totally my wheelhouse, because I always said if the RCMP had their own X-Files division, I'd be doing that today. I wouldn't be writing novels, because that's my jam, as the kids say these days. But I was always interested in the paranormal. Wasn't much of a believer. I was maybe I started off as a Fox Mulder, but I sort of ended up as a Dana Scully, as more of a skeptic. I was always interested in the subject matter, and like a lot of people, like you said, of our generation, one of the shows I watched rapidly as a kid was Unsolved Mysteries, and I always loved it when they would often do crimes. It was sort of like one part America's Most Wanted, one part In Search Of. But so I was always more interested when they would do shows about lake monsters and segments about UFOs and ghosts.
Yeah, I was gonna say those were always my favorite episodes. Like you said, you would have like the crime, the missing person, and then now we have a ghost story. It's like it was like always
Right.
like a special, like, ooh, it's a good one this time. We got to watch it. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and they did a segment on a very popular, what ended up being probably the most infamous UFO case in Canada, and it wasn't very far from where I lived. So this was something that you know I thought I could look into because there was still a lot of mystery attached to it, and it had this really kind of a wacky cast of characters. So I thought, why not? And I sort of inadvertently kind of inserted myself into this UFO investigation, and helped expose it as a hoax. It was again,
Oh,
it was
so it
kind of
was a
funny because
hoax.
there was really no question among the people that were involved that it's a hoax. But what was more compelling was the motivation behind the hoaxers. Like I said, it's almost funny because it's this most infamous UFO case in Canada, but the compelling part isn't whether or not it was aliens. Most people who know about this case know that it wasn't aliens, but
Right.
the people involved and the reason why they did it was so compelling that you couldn't help but be interested in this case. It was almost like a movie. It was just
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I always thought
Yeah.
about writing a book on the case, but the it doesn't have a third act. The third act is that it's all a hoax, and people who are typically drawn to UFO novels don't want to hear that. they
Oh,
want they
yeah,
want at
yeah.
least some ambiguity, if not straight out. Oh, it was.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want somebody else telling me it's not real. I want something that at least ends on the cliffhanger that something is out there. We don't know what happened. We can't explain it. So yeah, once they're like, no, we know what happened. These guys were
Mhm.
just behind so did they find out why they did it? Like, or was it just kind of for fun or
It was some people in a very small rural community, which is actually still small to this day. There's been a lot of development in that area when we went back to shoot the documentary, but it's funny the area Carp, Ontario. If you couldn't find a name that was more Canadian sounding than that, Carp, Ontario.
yeah.
It's still pretty small and undeveloped, but what it really was some people that they all sort of knew each other. They were all very interested in UFOs and conspiracies, and they'd always been trying to get the attention of UFO investigators with their stories. Um, it just got out of hand, really. They'd been telling this person who had been calling himself Guardian for a number of years had been trying to get UFO investigators to take his story seriously. And it wasn't until he sent out this videotape, and it just kind of exploded. It got in the
Yeah.
hands of the media. Unsolved Mysteries did this article, so I think it was really just a classic case of attention. People
Wow.
who are really big into conspiracies, as we know, especially today when it's sort of the scary landscape that we live in. They
Yeah.
want attention, right? They want to be heard, and they want you to sort of believe what they believe. And I think that's really what happened with this case. Case in point, the fact that this Guardian figure clammed right up after the Unsolved Mysteries aired. I mean, this person who had so much to say and was sending out all this material up to that point, suddenly radio silence after that point.
Wow. That's funny. So it's almost, I was thinking about, I was like, it's almost a reverse Scooby-Doo situation. So instead of like creating a ghost or alien to scare the meddling kids away, they're actually like, hey, we're looking for this attention. So yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah, it was
interesting.
it was
Yeah.
it was really really weird, and it was funny when the documentary crew came to talk to me. Um, it had been almost 30 years. I was like 16, 16, 17 when this happened. So the investigators at that time who were adults, when they were doing this documentary, um, a lot of the people who were involved at the time had either passed away or just didn't want to talk about it. Again, it was a very infamous case. So it was the documentary ended up being about me going back to this case after 30 years, as much as it was about giving an epilogue to that Unsolved Mysteries episode where it just left you with all of these unsolved mysteries. The documentary provided a nice cap on, well, here's all the stuff you didn't know. Here was the aftermath of that. Because a lot of people, if you go online, really wanted to know because it turned out that was the most watched episode of Unsolved Mysteries, especially in syndication. It was one of their most popular episodes.
Wow.
So a lot of people, if you go online, would still ask questions about whatever happened with this case. So the documentary was kind of an answer to that, as well as a 30-year, retrospective on the case itself.
Yeah, I actually tried to watch the documentary, but I could not. It's not available outside of Canada. All I got to see was a few clips that were on like the CBC website of there was some of you like looking at old photos and where I think
Right.
in one of them you hold up a picture of you and a friend and you've got on what you call your Fox Mulder trench coat or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I vividly remember that those pictures and that time. It was like again, it was a really fun, really weird time. This sort of like outlier experience I had as this kid, whereas now I'm this yeah, I'm a writer and I do some stuff in film and TV. But every now and again, I'll get an email from someone, even before the documentary, and say, "Were you the Ian Rogers that was involved in the Guardian case back in the early 2000s or early 1990s?" Because it's all online, right? The
Right, right,
UFO
yeah.
reports are out there. Again, the information is there for people who want to look it up. But yeah, it's I'm hoping the documentary gets a wider release. Again, it was a major documentary. It's geo locked obviously for Canada, as you
Yeah.
noticed, and they're still trying to sell rights to. I think it airs in the UK, but it doesn't have a US distributor yet, which is too bad.
Yeah.
It's a really professional, really well done documentary. Even though I'm in it, so
It's okay. Toot your own horn, man. That's what you have to do, especially in this business. We have to be our own cheerleaders, our biggest cheerleaders sometimes. So
no,
yeah.
you're absolutely right, and I like it. It's one of these weird things that I think stands out. I mean, like you said, it's just as a writer, I think we all have our books. We're all trying to boost that
Mhm.
signal for the stuff that we're doing, and the best way to do it, the thing that makes us unique, is
Yeah,
ourselves. Like
right.
something else that you have, whether it's something that you're doing creatively, or yeah, like I was a teenage UFO investigator. It is a pretty cool one. You know, it wasn't cool
Oh
at the
yeah.
time. I can tell you how bullied I got in high school about that, but finally, payback,
Yeah, it's
payback.
like, oh yeah, it finally pays off. So that's true. Like especially, with writing and especially in the film industry, it is almost like networking and writing are almost like equally important with one another. And having I'm going to call it a what's it, like having a what's it or something like that, where like a conversation starter, like there's a, hey, I used to investigate UFOs as a teenager. It's like, oh wow, that kind of opens the door to, oh, let's go talk to the UFO investigator guy. So yeah,
Right.
definitely a way of getting yourself remembered and also just a fun story to share. No, that's awesome, man. I love it. The story, the house on, was it Ashley Lane or Ashley Avenue? I keep saying it
Oh
wrong.
yeah.
The house on Ashley Avenue. Okay. Is currently in development as a film. How did that come about? Like, because the story was released, like the short story collection came out in like, was it 2014, somewhere around in there?
2012. Yeah, that
Oh,
that
20.
story got a the story. There's actually unlike a lot of the stories we write, story you just have an idea and you write the story, and that's typically yeah. There's not usually a very interesting story behind the stories we tell, but that one actually does have an interesting sort of genesis. And I wrote that when I was living in Toronto, and Toronto is a very expensive city to live in. It's even more expensive now, unbelievably, with the way that the housing is. I definitely couldn't afford it today, but I could afford it back in the early 2000s when I lived there, barely. So most of my money went towards rent and a little bit of food. So my idea of entertainment was like things that were free, going for walks around the city. So and I like to walk. So
Yeah.
one day I was going for a walk in one of the ritzier parts of town because the architecture is really nice. And I just saw this house. The sun was sort of going down, and there was this house, and the way that a lot of our ideas just come, it just popped into my head of what if this house was haunted, which isn't a very interesting idea, especially for a horror person. It's just haunted house stories are a dime a dozen. But I thought, what if no one on the street knew the house was haunted? Because usually in a house in a haunted in a neighborhood, a haunted house has sort of got a reputation. The kids cross the street to avoid it. It looks really decrepit. This house looked ordinary, and no
Mhm.
one knew that it was haunted, and it was empty. But what if no one knew that it was empty? What if no one knew anything really about this house except it looked completely normal and innocuous in that way? And then it sort of just went off on this tangent. Uh, in my sort of logical mind, it was like, well, if no one lives there, then who owns the house? Who's maintaining the property? So this is where I got this idea of a company that owns this house, that owns a number of properties that are all haunted, and they purposely leave them off the grid. They're too they're too dangerous to have people habitate inside them. So they're just too paranormally polluted. I think is the term I described in one story. So they leave them permanently empty, and sort of they have to. maintain them in sort of a groundskeeper kind of a tense because they don't want to draw attention to them. So that's sort of what took off the idea from there. And I knew that I didn't want it to be government. I knew I didn't want anything X-Files-ish or Men in Blackish. So I thought, well, how about an insurance company? So I think that had never really been done before. And then because it's an insurance company and insurance companies give us so many hassles in real life, I thought, well, how about I make this insurance company kind of nebulous in terms of their motivation? They're not necessarily the good guys for keeping these haunted houses and other buildings empty. They have their own motivations behind it. So what I did is I have these characters, these psychics and caseworkers, insurance investigators in this company who for all intents and purposes are good people, but they work for a company that might have their own, sort of nefarious ends. So I liked that kind of conflicting idea with this story. And so I started that story and I wrote it as if this company already exists. These people already work together. You get a little bit of their backstory, but I really, really just wanted to sort of dump the reader right into this world right away. And so I wrote the story. I ended up selling it to a Canadian literary journal called All Hallows, which was very successful, very, very well known in its day, by this company called Ash Tree Press. And they took the story. They actually took a second story called The Candle. And then before they could publish either story, they went out of business. Or they stopped, sorry, I shouldn't say they went out of business. They stopped publishing All Hallows. So both of those stories ended up going into my debut collection, Every House is Haunted, as unpublished stories. When you do a collection, it's nice to sort of have reprints as well as some unpublished stories.
Right.
So those two sort of went in there as, The House on Ashley Avenue went in there as an unpublished story. The Candle was sold elsewhere. So the first time people read the story would have been in the collection, Every House is Haunted. And then Ellen Datlow, sort of legendary horror director or editor, she selected the story for that year's Best Horror of the Year, and it was also nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award at the same time. So the story got a lot of notice, which was great because I really liked that story. And then Ellen had passed the story along to a movie producer that she knew named Roy Lee, that she sometimes sends stories to that she thinks might have film or television potential. So Roy read the story and really liked it. He reached out to me and asked if we could meet. So he was going to be in Toronto around that time. So we met in Toronto. He was producing the remake of Poltergeist at the time that was shooting in the area. So I met with him, my wife at his hotel, and it was funny, my publishers were there too. And right before we go into this meeting, they're like, when someone wants to auction one of your stories, they don't typically want to meet with you. If he wants to meet with you, there must be a reason. So I was already nervous enough going into this meeting, and then I hear that, I'm just like doubly nervous now.
Yeah.
So, but fortunately, Roy's a super nice guy. He's a massive horror fan. I remember one of the first things he said when we first started talking was that he just likes being scared. That he makes movies that scare him. He wants a good story, and you see it in the types of movies that he makes. He'll make these big tentpole movies, but he also likes these smaller, more intimate horror movies like Barbarian, for example, which is such a weird horror movie that it's incredible that it did as well as it did. But even if it didn't do as well as the box office, I still think it would have been successful as this little sleeper movie because it's so creepy and unique. But fortunately, it got the appreciation it deserved, and it did quite well at the box office. But that's Roy. Roy just really can recognize a really good story. So I take a lot of pride in the fact that he really liked The House on Ashley Avenue. And what I took from the meeting afterwards was that he really wanted me to be involved in it. It was kind of like a job interview. He wanted to see if I could work with him. Because then I ended up writing a series of like a Bible, essentially, because the story was going to be a TV series at first. So he asked me if I could write a Bible for the TV series, which I did. So that the story and my notes, my Bible, ended up getting optioned at that time by NBC Universal for a TV series. And lots of people were circling it. I think Matthew Fox was interested at one point in doing it. And a pilot was written by these two guys, Jason Pagan and Andrew Deutschman, who had done this really great sort of a indie science fiction movie called Project Almanac. And they also wrote one of the Paranormal Activity movies. So I met with them, and they were really super nice guys, very talented. And so they wrote this pilot. And then, like the way of all pilots, or many pilots, it didn't get shot and nothing happened with it. And that was where the story went for a few years. And
Yeah.
then,
So
yeah,
when did it first like was this back in like 2015, 2016 when this was going on or
yeah, the story was first published in 2012, and then it would have been it would have been in Best Horror of the Year the follower in 2013, and I think it
okay.
was 2013. I want to say October 2013 is when I met with Roy Lee, and then it
Okay.
was optioned shortly after that. And then yeah, I think there was a renewal or two in there, so that takes you a few years into the future. And
Yeah.
then there was a couple of years when the rights were reverted back to me after the TV show didn't happen, and I think it was around 2018 or 2019 Sam Raimi's people reached out to me suddenly, and they asked if I had the rights back to this story. And what had turned out, what had happened was Roy, who obviously is friends with Sam, they'd produced a few movies together. They had done The Grudge and they had done the
Mhm.
Poltergeist
Right.
remake. He had just said to Sam, "I really like this story. I tried to do it as a TV series, but I couldn't make it work. Maybe you want to try it as a film." So Sam read the story and really liked it. Had his people reach out to me. I had the rights back at that point, and I told him that this story is actually connected to a few other stories in my collection. So he said, "We'll send the collection over." So I sent him the book, and he decided to option all 22 stories, which
Oh
was
wow.
obviously really, really cool. And there's kind of
That's
a
very
lesson in
cool.
there too. It's worth saying that a couple of months, I would say 2 or 3 months before Raimi approached me, there was another, I won't say who it was, but it was a equally huge horror director approached
Hmm.
me. His production company approached me. They wanted the rights to that story, but they didn't want to pay any money for me to do it
Yeah.
for. They wanted to shop it for free, and
Yeah.
I turned it down. And it was just like, everyone else in this business makes money, but they always want the writer to work for free. So it's like even the guy emailing me is being paid to email me, but they didn't want to pay me anything. So
Oh
you
yeah.
will find people in Hollywood that will say that in some instances it's actually okay to shop for free. But again, those people are all getting paid. Even the people
Right.
that are sort of just going to an office every day are still getting paid. Whereas me as a full time author, I don't get paid unless they pay me. So
Yeah.
I turned them down, even though it was like a massively successful, and I was a fan of his work too. So it kind of sucked, and they understood. But if I had done that, if I had given away my story rights for free to this guy, and then Raimi had come along 3 months later and said, "I want to buy the whole book," and I had to tell him, "Oh, I'm sorry, I gave those rights away for free 3 months ago." It's just like
Yeah.
that's why, and I cannot stress this enough to writers: if you take away anything from this, don't give away your rights for free ever.
Exactly. Yes, that is
Your
a
work has worth.
that is a huge thing. Yeah. And it's one of those things that, like you said, it's something that because there are so many people who want to write, who want to have their stories told, it's almost easy, almost I almost want to say predatory that you can get a writer to give their work away for free. Oh, my writing's going to be in a movie. Like, oh, that's great. How much you getting for it? We didn't talk about that. Okay. So it's like, but yeah, it happens all the time. And yeah, especially in the film industry. Yeah. I know there's a big, coming from the no sleep community, there's a big narrator and podcasts that like to do like horror stories, narrations, things like that. And, a lot of them don't want to pay writers. There are some really good ones, like the No Sleep podcast. They're good people. They're Canadians too, actually. So, which probably, yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, but there are a lot of them where like, especially like being on Reddit, I'll get a message from somebody's like, "Hey, I love your story. Can I read it on my YouTube channel?" I was like, I don't give away stories for free, sorry. And then I go and look, and this channel has, a million followers, and like, they're making money. I was like, all right, you want to make money off of my work, but you don't want to pay me for it. So no,
Well,
that's not how this
it's never a
works.
charitable organization. That's the only
Yeah,
time you might want to do it, but it's never the charitable organizations that are approaching you asking you to do something for free. It's always someone, like you said, who's just trying to make money off your back, off your
yeah,
story. And it's just really unfortunate because we work so hard at this, and unlike other industries, we're alone. Like it's
right,
just, it
yeah,
doesn't matter if you're Stephen King or people like us, you're doing it by yourself. Like it's just
right,
like even Stephen King, who's rich, people always talk about, oh well, he's got all this money, he should be doing this or that for free. It's just like he still works. It's just
yeah,
like that attitude of your work doesn't have any worth because you're getting paid suddenly. It's really unfortunate because you don't see that in any other industry, but in the arts, it's like the discussion going on with AI right now.
yeah,
It's like anything that people can do to be lazy or not have to do the work, and they think it's great. Oh, not to mention that if it's something technological, the latest, you know, doodad, people are sort of mystified by it. You know, like a couple
Mhm.
of years ago, it was like NFTs, which have now collapsed.
Right.
But and now it's AI, right? It's just like everyone wants the, you know, what's wrong with AI? Why isn't it? It's so easy, it's so quick. It's like that's why it is. You know, it's just like it's a lazy shortcut approach. You know,
Yeah.
for people who have no
And it's,
creativity.
yeah, exactly. And, on the subject of AI, because of AI learns, I'm going to do air quote, learns by reading, other stories, it cannot create anything wholly new on its own. It can only be derivative of what it has seen and ingested. So, in that alone, it's like, all right, you're not going to get something new and original. You're going to get something that's just kind of, a mishmash of other things kind of thrown together. And 999 times out of 1,000, it's going to be garbage. I mean, you might find one thing where the AI actually, you know, sticks the landing, but yeah, it's like
Well,
it's
and it's
just
theft, right? Let's face it.
it's theft.
There's
Yeah, it is theft. Yeah,
lawsuits that are in place that are, you know, as we speak by authors that even that we know that they're being taught by work that's been stolen. You know, like the work that they don't have copyright on. It's just like you don't just get to take a book and feed it into your AI and be able to
right.
say, oh, now I can write in the style of this author. Like you don't have that author's permission. Again, it is theft because what is theft? Well, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you because it's the easy way out. Usually, people that don't have the means, right? And that's the same thing. It's people who aren't. It's why like the tech bros love AI. They're not creative people. They're not creative minded. They want to see the easy shortcut to money because that's what
Right.
seems to be what supposedly is why we're all doing it. You know, like yes, we're only doing this because we want to make money. It's just as I would tell anyone, if all you're interested in is money, go to law school. Do not go into publishing. Do not go into publishing because you think you're going to make tons of money. You do it
Right.
because you love to write. That's the simple answer to that one.
Yeah, it just comes down to that times like, you know what, with all of the rejection, with all of the no's, with all of the, that comes with writing, and you still want to do it, it's like, yeah, that's what makes you a writer, I think. It's like, you're able to weather through, you cannot be successful unless you're first willing to fail. And it's just, you just build on those failures and you never get out of that mode of imposter syndrome. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah. It
it's
doesn't it
always
doesn't matter what you do. I deal with that daily. But I think you nailed it. It's success. Success is sticking with it. It's not
yeah.
about what you accomplish. Awards mean nothing. Like let me tell you, like money is nice because it pays the bills. It's
Mhm.
security. But awards are meaningless. Awards, they are so subjective, and there are so many books in any given year that they don't even consider. So how any award can be taken on a valor of this book is better than that book, they're meaningless. Awards are nice when because they draw attention, positive attention to your work. That's the
Right.
best you can say about awards. Because even if you don't win, hey, you know it's a good signal boost.
Right.
I'm always honored when I'm nominated, and I could care less when I'm not. You know, it does
Right.
not. There are so many books out there, and I celebrate the ones that get that bump the same way that I celebrate someone who gets an option or gets
Right.
whatever. Right? It's just when you want to celebrate those things. You want to just celebrate books in general, considering there's so many distractions in this world and so many people who don't or just can't read, you know, or just can't aren't inclined to. It's I think we should be celebrating everyone. I'm a firm believer in that we're not really in competition with each other, that we're just in competition with ourselves to do the best work. I don't want to just read my books, you know, like I want to read everyone's books. I want everyone to succeed, so I've got more books to read. You know, when I when I'm a beta reader for someone or when I blurb someone's book that I'm a fan of, I'm more excited the fact that I get a sneak preview. It's like, oh, I get to read their book before anyone else. You know, that's the excitement for me. It's not a
Yeah.
business networking thing that I'm doing this for someone else. Like I'm happy to do a favor and promote someone, but for me, I'm still excited. You know, I'm still
Yeah.
excited as a reader. You know?
Yeah. And it's also like, especially like in those situations when you are getting the like advanced copy to, for or a beta reader or to give a blurb, it's kind of your it gives you an opportunity to, I don't know, like it's a you're giving access to vulnerability. Like you're like the person who wrote it is putting something out there. It's like, I think it's good. I'm going to hand it to you. You may read it and say, "Oh, this is absolute shit," and just hand it back to me. So that's always the fear, is that no matter what you write, no matter what you do, there's always this fear in the back of your mind is like, I'm the only one who gets it. Nobody else is going to get this. So
Right.
just simply putting writing out there is a huge accomplishment. You know, completing a short story, completing a novel is a an amazing accomplishment. So just and the hard part of that is like, okay, I've done that. And it's like, and all right, go write the next one. It's kind of
Well,
what it is
I've
like.
got three books. I've got three books coming out this year. One's a novella, and one's my very first novel, and then one is the first book and the first full length novel in this Blackland series. So I've had to start going out and getting blurbs. And even just today, I this morning I asked for I had to send out blurbs for Sycamore, and one of the authors that I got was a really big get. He was someone who I don't know, and so I had no idea what he was going to say, if he was even going to reply at all. And
Yeah,
it's the most awkward part of the job when you have to ask this because it's such an imposition on people's time, and everyone's busy and they've got their schedules. And these three books that I've got coming out are all very different. So even the authors I was asking had to be very geared towards that type of book. And
right.
fortunately, I've been in the business for almost 20 years, so I know a lot of people, and most of them I'm pretty cool with asking. But yeah, there was a couple of people that I don't know these people well, and these would have been big gets, but to my pleasure, everyone has said yes. Like
Oh
even
wow.
with even with their deadlines. Even there was one. I've got a novella coming out in August, launching at Worldcon in Glasgow, and I can't say too much about it yet because it hasn't been announced. But it's a very weird kind of a fantasy. It's kind of like John Wick, but with angels and demons. That's all I can
Nice.
really say. But I got a very very big author to blurb it for me, and I knew he wasn't going to have time, and he literally wrote me back and said, yeah, I don't have a lot of time. I've got deadlines. I've got other books I've got to blurb. And then it was dot, dot, dot. But you had me at John Wick and Angels with Angels and Demons. Send it over. So it was just like, yes.
Yeah, it's that's the elevator pitch. You got to have something to catch their. It's got to be short and catchy. He's like, oh yeah, I'll check that out. John Wick and Demons and Angels. Yeah, yeah, send that my way. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, cool. So yeah, so yeah, I did want to say, going back to the house on Ashley Avenue, I really love that story a lot. Like, and I've read it like a few times and just kind of going back through it. And what I really love about the way that story comes out, it's like there are breadcrumbs that you distribute throughout the story that just pay off later. And as a short story writer and as a short story reader, there's like different ways of getting the reader's attention to stick around. And I think a very common way that people do it is to start with something very like they basically start with something very shocking, like something, it's a death, or like they just throw out like, oh, I'm a demon hunter or something like that in the first line, and like, oh, okay, I'll keep it. But your story doesn't do that. Like you said, it drops you into the universe as like, all right, this is, we're not seeing, the psychic going through the initiation stages of it or anything like that. We're actually seeing them going out to investigate one of these houses. And it's like, yeah, just little things that just like little pieces along the way. And like, what's he got in his pocket? What's happening with this? What's happening with that? And I just love the way it just kind of unfolds into the story. And like it's just like you litter, I'm gonna like little, it's like Chekhov's guns, but you Chekhov's gun, but you got like little bullets that you load into the gun that are just placed throughout the story that pay off later. And it's just very well done. I can see why it was as successful as it was, and why it's in the hands of Sam Raimi right now. So yeah, it's really, really awesome, man.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed writing it, and I think I knew right when I was done that I wanted to revisit those characters and also kind of explore what the other seven properties were of the eight. And so it was sort of like a no-brainer for me that there's going to be eight stories. I've written three of them so far. The second one, Go Fish, was published on Tor.com a few years ago, and the third one is called ICU, and it's set at a carnival. So I also like the idea that each one of the buildings, because I mean the first story is very much a haunted house story, but again I wanted to make it different. I wanted to do, give my own little twist to it, and I knew from that moment on there were going to be different types of haunted buildings. So the second one in Go Fish, it's a former fish processing plant on the lakeshore, and then the third one, which hasn't been published yet, it's a novella. Novellas are harder to place.
Yeah.
You reach a certain length, and they're hard to find homes for them. So this one hasn't seen the light of day yet, but I
Mhm.
really love this story, and it's called ICU, and it takes place at a carnival, And this one, the haunted building is a fun house. And I always liked this one because it has a sort of a double twist. There's another reason why this is a unique member of the eight, because it's the only one of the buildings that moves. It travels with the carnival
Oh, wow.
as it's broken down. So it's like a haunted house that moves. So I really liked that. It's a
Oh, that's
really dark, creepy tale, and there's some real game changers in that. It's not just about, hey, these two investigators and their adventures in these haunted houses, and there's no real stakes. No, there's some pretty major stakes and some pretty major changes that happen in the third one, and then you're going to see the ramifications of those things that happen in that story in the fourth story, which I've sort of tentatively started. I know what all eight of them are. I know how the whole series is going to end. I think I'm probably going to cap it with a short novel and then just collect all the stories into one book and call it, the eight or something like that
yeah.
one day. But I'm not rushing them. Like it was a good 10-year gap between writing The House on Ashley Avenue and Go Fish, and I wrote ICU pretty soon after Go Fish. But even now, even though I know what the fourth one's going to be, I'm kind of taking my time. I don't know if it'll be my life's work. I'd like to think that I'm going to finish this sooner rather than later, but I'm definitely
Yeah.
taking my time with the series, even though I know what each one is going to be.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely take it. I mean, yeah, I figure George R. R. Martin, he's taken plenty of time with
Yeah.
his releases of things. I know The Dark Tower, it was like a 15-year period from book 1 to book 7. So yeah, you can take as long, it takes as long as it needs to take. So writing question, are you a outliner or are you one that just kind of like to put characters in a situation and see what happens?
You know what? I wish I there's because it's an artistic pursuit. It would be so cool to say that I'm a pantser. I think is what they call them,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
pants. But I'm not. I'm just my parents were logical people. I am a logical writer. I need to have an outline, and for me, it's really just if I don't write it down, I forget.
Yeah.
I think it's a really nice thought that, oh, if it's a really good idea, well, then you'll just remember it later on. Nope.
Nope.
That doesn't work for me. My greatest fear is that I'm going to remember something and I'll be in the shower or on a bus or something. I have nothing to write it down on, and it's just it doesn't usually happen that way. I'm usually able to write it down or remember it, but I have to if I'm going to use it later on. So like my Word documents are usually pretty organized, but it's like here's some miscellaneous dialogue, here's a miscellaneous scene, and then once I'm ready, once it coalesces enough into a big enough mass, it's like, oh, this one's ready to write, and now I usually start writing. But it's usually this bit of flotsam and jetsam that's sort of flowing into this idea. It's usually an idea, a supernatural idea typically, and then a character. And it's sort
Mhm.
of like critical mass because you have
Right.
to have a good character. It doesn't have to be a nice character, but it has to be a good character who's going to carry that idea. And then once those two things explode, you usually have a story, or I usually have a story. That's when I'm usually ready to start writing. I have all
Yeah.
kinds of fragments which are just here's an idea, but I don't have the thing that's going to spark it, which is usually a character or enough of an idea that it's just, well, that's a cool scene, but that's not a story,
Yeah. I
And
mean,
we all have those,
yeah, yeah, and with the film industry, one of the things that they talk about a lot of times is the story engine. All right, what is going to drive your character and what is going to drive the plot through the story? And knowing sometimes that's the hardest part to figure out. I've got a great idea. Oh, I've got a great character, but I I know where I want them to go, but I don't know how to get them there. And that's the part that gets to be a little tricky that we get hung up on. When coming up with the characters for it, I usually gravitate towards two different types. It's either the best person that this could happen to or the very worst person that this could ever happen to. And those seem to be like I tend to balance back and forth because there's fun things you can do with that. And like in this one, like the house on Ashley Avenue, it's definitely, you've got professionals, you've got people who are, this is what we're designed to do. And it's like, you've got the experts there. So yeah, it kind of falls onto that side of it. Is like, these are the right people to handle this situation. So yeah.
Yeah, and I try and keep it really blue collar too. The last thing I wanted was, I'm a big fan. Like again, one of the things that also inspired me growing up were comics. I'm a big Spider-Man fan. I was a big X-Men fan, and I did not want to make these characters superheroes. As much as I like superheroes, I wanted them to feel very almost blue collar in their work. This is their job, and they're passionate about what they do, but they're human. They've got the flaws of being human, and they definitely have the mortality of of being in danger of being killed by these things that they work
Yeah.
with every day.
I've checked out a few of other of your stories. I've been actually, like I said, I've been going through the your Blacklands website. I started back in the origin date. I think it starts like in 2010. I was just kind of reading back through like the history of it, and yeah, that's
Yeah, it's
really
been a lot of
cool.
fun creating that too. It's that's another one that sort of just grew sort of organically. My idea was to just, I think the very first Blackland story was a novella published as a chapbook called Temporary Monsters that introduced the Felix Wren character as well as the Blackland series as a whole. And then since then, I've written a bunch of stories with him, but also stories that are sort of just standalone. That just sort of like, because this is a phenomenon that involves the whole planet, there'd be other people from different walks of life, and how are they dealing with this world where paranormal has just become the norm? People where if this has been going on since the 1940s or so, there would be whole generations of people, kids who just grew up in this world and never knew a world where monsters didn't exist. So I was just fascinated by how that would affect everyone. So I mean, it's more fun when you can write people that are exciting, like a private investigator working supernatural cases. But I've written stories that are like, well, what would the commercial fishing industry look like in the Bermuda Triangle when there's all these portals out there? It would be,
Yeah,
it's already a fairly, fishing is, it can be a very treacherous job, but as
yeah,
we've seen in like The Perfect Storm. But when you write the story, it's like, well, it's like The Perfect Storm meets Godzilla, it's trying to mash these things together, keep them
yeah,
really, really interesting. And
yeah.
yeah, so I've been doing that. It'll be 15 years this year. I've been writing the
Wow,
Blackland story. So it's taken that long for me it's been a long time, but the first full length novel is coming out in October, Sycamore. And it's a Felix Wren novel as well.
nice.
He's, uh, he's definitely kind of, the main character of the series, if for no other reason than I've written more stories, recurring stories, Blackland stories with him in it. But there's other characters that are starting to recur as well because I've enjoyed them. And then, as I said, sometimes it's just fun to write one with no characters,
Mhm.
no familiar characters whatsoever, and just say, hey, here's how some other ordinary people are dealing with this world where ghosts and monsters just exist as a matter of course.
Yeah, I would say I can see some of the influence of reading Stephen King growing up because he does also kind of have that like the same characters pop up every now and then and kind of every one of his stories, he has worked a way to get them kind of interconnected. Actually, I was reading another one of your stories. I had a collection, Screams from the Dark, and I didn't even realize that you were in it until it's literally the first story. I just opened it up. I was like, oh, he's right there. And that story even makes a reference to the Blacklands as well. It's like, oh
Yep.
wow, there's a little, a little snippet of the bigger picture. But and that's
Yeah, no, that was a wild story, and that's one where I've never been the first story in a table of contents before, so that one was really cool. And yeah, it was the Blackland story, and Ellen Datlow, who edited that anthology. No, again, she's a fan of the series, and she really gets that these stories function as standalone. There was never any question of, no, I can't take this because no one's going to understand the Blacklands. It was like, nope, it works. It functions as a standalone. You don't need to read the other stories. You get the idea that you're in this world, but it doesn't exclude the casual reader who's never read a Blackland story before. But if you have, maybe you're going to go out and seek other ones. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and that's what I liked about it. 'Cause, like it again, it's a vampire story, and it's like it only really kind of mentions the black you've been infected or come in contact with a Blacklands entity or something like that is kind of how it's phrased in there. And I remember reading that and it just kind of like the light bulb went off. I was like, oh shit, this is part of the expanded universe, the Ian Rogers expanded universe. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and as you said, Stephen King does it so well too, right? Like it's just again, if you catch it, you feel really clever and
Yeah,
it's really cool because it adds to your reading experience. But if you don't catch it, you don't. It's not excluding that reader for not
right.
catching it. So it's
Yeah,
still like a good story in and of itself.
it's like a night it's like yeah, it's like finding a little Easter egg that for
Yep.
for the constant reader who comes back to your work, it's like, oh, I recognize
Right.
this or I recognize that. That's a fun little when you're able to have a large enough body of work where you can start working those back in. That's a lot of fun to plant those seeds and see if people pick up on them. So yeah, that's really cool.
Well, and I'm really hoping that Sycamore, when it comes out in October, will be kind of like the Jupiter of this solar system, where it's going to have that gravity now, where um, if you've never heard of the story before, you might be more inclined to track down those other stories. I mean, it's my
Right.
intention to collect those stories eventually in Blacklands collections down the road. But for now, I mean, even I have a newsletter on Substack, and I think the last one that I did as sort of a a preparation for the publication of Sycamore coming up, I even said, here's all the Blackland stories in print right now, if you kind of want a preview of what's to come, so it's not maybe not the way other people might do a series. Like, I'm just going to write a bunch of short stories and novellas for 15 years and then write the first novel. But it's just it's worked for me, and
Yeah,
I think you have to kind of carve your own path. I think I really
exactly.
think it's going to pay off in the end, and you sort of have to work to your own schedule, like you said yourself. I mean, you do the story that you want to do when you want to do it, and that's how you're going to work the best and the most passionately. So I think obviously with the success and the attention that Every House is Haunted has had anyway, I'm really hoping that people will see it as, hey, here's a novel by Ian Rogers as well. I just want to see what he could do with the novel. Even the reviews for Every House is Haunted, many of them said, I'd be curious to see what Rogers does with the novel one day.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's been over 10 years, but yeah, we're finally here.
Hey, they take as long. It's like a wizard. They arrive precisely when they mean to. So yeah, but yeah, it's sometimes it takes a while to get them worked out and kind of figuring out, until you're at that point in your career where you're able to write full time all day, every day, 7 days a week, kind of Stephen King style. We all have to juxtapose writing around you know a day job, or literally just spending time and seeing your family. It's a
Yeah,
challenge. But yeah,
the structure is important too. I mean,
yeah,
I do write full time, but I've got a very much a structure in my day in terms of like anything from exercise or house cleaning. It's just like you have to have that structure, because I don't know any writer who writes full time and they're doing it 7 hours a day every day. It's just like
right,
that would be hard. I think your brain would just would you would cook your brain. It's usually people, a lot of people I know, it's sort of like they work in the morning and then in the afternoon they do errands, running around, whatever, and they might do a bit more in the evening again. But it's to get stuff done, you have to have that structure. You have to have a schedule, because you're your own boss, and you have
right,
to be kind of a strict boss, or else nothing's going to get done. Because if I'm not cracking the whip on my own ass, nothing's going to get finished. Right? It's as
right.
simple as that. And having these deadlines, having everything else going on between obviously these books coming out this year, the Every House is Haunted film, which hopefully will be starting production sometime soon. These are
Nice,
all things that are exciting, but it also means that they're busier for me. Like, things can
right,
get overwhelming very, very quickly, and in the best way. I mean, it's just, I mean, a lot of writers, let's face it, wish they could have these problems. So I'm definitely not complaining, but I also want to be able to do the best work possible. I
right.
don't want to do things because I'm rushing. I don't want to do things for the wrong motivation, except I want to write a really good story to the best of my ability.
Right. Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah. And I think that is one of the key things, is having a routine, like no matter what it is. Like, if you can the first challenge is setting your routine and then sticking to it. Cause, I know a lot of, especially, writers starting out, or even ones that have been in the business for a little bit, having some success. You see people saying, I can't write if I'm not motivated. I was like, well, that's not how it works. You get motivation through the schedule, actually, which, for me, like, it was something that I kind of butted heads against, because I was never the type of person to keep a schedule. It was just like, I was always just I show up when I need to show up, I leave when I need to leave, and I do what I need to do when I need to do it. But as life gets busier, as not complications, but your schedule gets fuller, it's like, all right, it's really not restricting. It actually frees you up, and you can see how you're spending your time. And that's what opened my eyes to it, was that I actually started, before I started keeping a schedule of what I was doing, I wrote down like how I spent my time every day, and I realized, wow, I waste a lot of time. And was like, all right, so let's fix this and let's figure it out. So yeah, having the routine, having the schedule is huge. And that's, I think, one of the first obstacles that people have to, to work around, to finally find that success. And so,
Well, I think it was, I'm probably going to misquote this. I want to say it was Robert Benchley, but I'm pretty sure, I think it was him. But he said that in terms of motivation and sort of the idea that being like this artistic pursuit where you have to be motivated, he's like, oh yeah, I believe in motivation. I make sure that I'm motivated every morning at 7 a.m. It was just like, in his mind, that's how he treated it. Like he acknowledged that it was art, but it's work, and if you're going to get it done, you have to treat it like it's a job.
Yeah.
It's
I schedule my motivation every morning at 7 a.m. There you go.
That's right. And I like that. I mean, he was sort of a satirist and humorist, and it was just like, but he's not wrong, Like
no, he's not. Yeah.
Again, if that's how you want to write, again, if you're only going to do that when the muse moves you, and you want to have all that kind of artsy, flowery stuff attached to it, again, yeah, as they say, you do you. But for me, it's just like I know that I want to write stories, and to get them done, I need to have that motivation. I need to actually work at it. There's
Mm-hmm.
this idea these days of I want to say coddling, because I'm not saying that it's old school, but I've heard the phrase toxic positivity, and I'd never heard of that before. But it was this idea that, well, if you want to call yourself a writer, you can call yourself a writer. You don't even need to have finished a story, and you could still call yourself a writer. And I remember thinking, like, I understand the intent of what they're trying to say, that no one wants to make it like it's a class thing. But I feel like you have to do something. You can't just say you don't need to do anything, and you can still call yourself a writer. Like, I get the intent, but I still feel like you're sort of encouraging, mediocrity or laziness. Like, you don't need to do anything if you just want to call yourself a writer, because you're still a writer, and you're a success. So it's like you kind of have to do something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily gatekeeping if in that scenario. It's not. It's like, all right, you can't just call yourself a writer if you're not actually writing. But there are aspects of writing that, isn't writing actually. So it's like, but I mean, so yeah, I get that. So
well, and
it's definitely,
it's hard. Let's face it. There are also writers who don't write that often, or they publish very infrequently, but they still do really incredible work. It's not like someone's going to someone like Thomas Harris, who does a book like every 10 years and says, you better be doing this every day. It's like, I don't think I'm going to dictate to the guy that wrote classics like Red Dragon or Silence of the Lambs that he needs to be doing this every day, because clearly what he's doing is working for him. What I think the intent behind, it's like when someone says, well, you should write every day. And then you'll always see the blowback from people, especially online, where it's just like, that's ableist, and, I can't write every day. Don't tell me that I'm not going to be a success. It's like, I don't think when people talk about writing every day, they literally mean you need to do this every day. Like, the intent of that kind of advice is just, what they're trying to say is that you need to work. You need to commit to it. No one's saying that you better do it every day or else you're never going to be a success. Obviously, that's not true. Case in point, again, someone like Thomas Harris, who I'm pretty sure probably doesn't write every day. What the intent of that is being committed to your craft is really what it is. That's how you're going to get better. And when you get better, that's how you're going to get published. It's as simple as that. It's honing a skill. It really, is really what it is.
Yeah. Ian, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great chat. I had a lot of fun, learned a lot. So yeah, thank you for spending some time with me today, man.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This has been a blast.
Keep up to date with Ian's latest news and releases on his website, ian-rogers.com, and on his Substack, onemoreshadow.substack.com. If there's an author you'd love to hear from, or if you're an author who just wants to chat, drop me an email at storyclubpod@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us today at the Storytellers Club. I am your host, Chris Hicks, and until next time, thanks for listening.